Have some breaking news that we wanted to let you know about, and having to do with Karmelo Anthony. And the breaking news is this: we understand that his legal team is now seeking a new judge. So he was convicted more than a year after Austin Metcalf was stabbed to death at a Texas high school track meet. That is when a jury convicted Karmelo Anthony of murder and sentenced him to 35 years behind bars. The case, which started as a confrontation between two teens under a Team 10, then grew and became very controversial. It drew intense public scrutiny and competing claims of self-defense. So Anthony is now serving his
The first
sentence.
image that emerged from inside the Texas prison system didn't show flashing lights, a crowded courtroom, or the chaos of the day everything changed. It showed silence. A shaved head, a sleeveless prison uniform, a blank expression staring into a camera that never blinked. For many, that single photograph became the final chapter of a story that had already divided an entire nation. For others, it marked the beginning of an even bigger question. How does a teenager whose face once appeared across every major news outlet end up behind prison walls, with decades stretching out before him? The release of the new prison image immediately spread across social media, where millions debated what they were looking at. Some saw justice finally catching up. Others saw the consequences of a split-second decision that destroyed multiple families forever. But beyond the headlines, the hashtags, and the endless online arguments lies a much darker reality. Prison is not the end of a criminal case. It is where the sentence truly begins. Every morning starts the same. Every door locks behind you. Every movement is controlled. Every mistake carries consequences. The freedom that once seemed permanent disappears one metal gate at a time. For 19-year-old Karmelo Anthony, that reality became official after a Texas jury convicted him of murdering 17-year-old Austin Metcalf in connection with the fatal stabbing at a Frisco high school track meet. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison, and shortly afterward, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice released a new intake photograph following his transfer into state custody. At around the same time, Anthony filed notice that he intended to appeal his conviction. The image itself revealed very little. No emotion, no explanation, no glimpse into what was happening beyond those prison walls. Yet it became one of the most discussed photographs in America. The public had followed every stage of the investigation. They watched as evidence was presented in court. They learned about the arguments made by both prosecutors and the defense. They saw the verdict announced and the sentence handed down. But once the courtroom emptied and the prison gates closed, curiosity only intensified. Rumors quickly flooded the internet. Some claimed leaked prison photographs exposed Anthony's daily life. Others circulated fabricated courtroom images or invented stories about his treatment behind bars. Investigators and fact-checkers later confirmed that many of the viral images and claims were false, noting that cameras were not permitted during the trial and urging the public to rely on verified information. What is actually known paints a far different picture. This is not a story about internet rumors. It is the verified story of a case that shocked the country, the prison life that officially began after sentencing, and the haunting consequences of one violent encounter that lasted only seconds, but changed countless lives forever. Before those prison walls closed around Karmelo Anthony, there was another young man with dreams, a family waiting for him to come home, and an ordinary school event that no one imagined would end in tragedy. And that is where this story truly begins. Long before prison walls, court hearings, and national headlines, two teenagers were preparing for what should have been an ordinary day at a high school track meet. Friends gathered, athletes warmed up, and families expected to cheer from the sidelines. No one could have imagined that the event would end with one student dead and another facing the rest of his youth inside the Texas prison system. Austin Metcalf was remembered by family, friends, and teammates as a hardworking student-athlete with a bright future. Those who knew him described someone who enjoyed competition and valued the friendships he built through sports. His death left an enormous void in the lives of everyone who loved him. Karmelo Anthony also had a future ahead of him. Before the incident, he was known as a teenager with ambitions and opportunities. But everything changed after the confrontation that prosecutors said escalated into a fatal stabbing. The tragedy instantly transformed two families forever, one grieving the unimaginable loss of a son, the other watching a teenager become the center of one of the country's most closely followed criminal cases. As investigators pieced together what happened, public attention exploded. Social media quickly became flooded with opinions, speculation, and misinformation, making it increasingly difficult to separate verified facts from emotional reactions. While the legal process continued, the case became a national conversation about violence, accountability, and the devastating consequences of decisions made in moments. Before we continue, if you appreciate carefully researched true crime stories based on verified facts, please like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Files, and turn on notifications so you never miss future investigations. No matter where people stood, everyone agreed on one heartbreaking truth: two families would never be the same again. As investigators reconstructed the events leading up to the fatal confrontation, they focused on the minutes before violence erupted. Witness statements, physical evidence, and testimony presented in court helped establish a timeline, revealing how what began as a disagreement quickly escalated into a deadly encounter. According to evidence presented during the trial, the confrontation occurred in an area where students had gathered during the track meet. Prosecutors argued that the disagreement intensified within moments, ending when Austin Metcalf was fatally stabbed. The defense, however, maintained that Karmelo Anthony acted in self-defense. Those competing accounts became one of the central issues the jury was asked to evaluate. Beyond the courtroom, the case sparked intense public debate. Videos, edited clips, and unverified social media posts circulated widely, with many claiming to reveal hidden truths about what happened. Investigators and news organizations repeatedly cautioned that much of this material lacked context or was simply false. As emotions ran high, separating verified evidence from online speculation became increasingly difficult. One of the clearest warning signs in this case was how rapidly an ordinary disagreement turned into irreversible violence. There was no prolonged series of events stretching over days or weeks. Instead, prosecutors argued that a brief confrontation had life-altering consequences in a matter of seconds. For Austin Metcalf's family, every new development was another painful reminder of the life they had lost. For Karmelo Anthony's family, each court appearance carried the growing realization that the legal consequences could shape the rest of his life. As the investigation continued, detectives turned their attention to forensic evidence, witness testimony, and every detail that could explain exactly what happened during those critical moments, evidence that would ultimately become the foundation of the prosecution's case. What began as a routine high school track meet ended in a matter of moments, leaving an entire community in shock. Students who had gathered to compete and support their classmates suddenly found themselves witnessing a scene that would remain etched in their memories forever. According to evidence presented during the trial, the confrontation started after a disagreement between Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf. Witnesses described a brief but tense exchange before the situation escalated. Prosecutors argued that the encounter turned deadly when Anthony produced a knife and stabbed Metcalf once in the chest. The wound proved catastrophic. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but despite their efforts, Austin Metcalf died from his injuries. His death transformed what had been a school sporting event into an active homicide investigation. Detectives immediately secured the area, interviewed witnesses, collected physical evidence, and worked to establish a precise timeline of the incident. Throughout the trial, prosecutors relied on eyewitness testimony, forensic evidence, and statements gathered during the investigation to argue that the stabbing was not legally justified. The defense maintained that Anthony acted in self-defense, asserting that he believed he faced an imminent threat. Both sides presented their interpretations of the evidence, leaving the jury to determine which account was supported beyond a reasonable doubt. The emotional impact extended far beyond the crime scene. Students struggled to process what they had witnessed, families mourned alongside the Metcalf family, and the Frisco community searched for answers that could never fully explain how a dispute lasting only seconds ended with a young life lost. By the time investigators completed their initial work, they had assembled a case that would soon move from the crime scene into the courtroom, where every piece of evidence would face intense scrutiny. In the hours following the fatal stabbing, investigators worked quickly to preserve every piece of evidence. The scene was secured, witnesses were separated for individual interviews, and forensic specialists documented the area in detail. Detectives knew that the truth would depend not on rumors or social media speculation, but on verifiable facts supported by physical evidence and credible testimony. According to court records, investigators collected witness statements from students, coaches, and others who were present during the incident. They also examined the physical evidence recovered at the scene and reviewed available video footage to help reconstruct the sequence of events. Prosecutors argued that this evidence consistently supported their version of how the confrontation unfolded. Unlike many true crime cases, there was no elaborate attempt to conceal the crime or dispose of evidence after the incident. Instead, the investigation centered on determining whether the use of deadly force was legally justified. That question became the heart of the case from the very beginning and remained the central issue throughout the trial. As investigators assembled their findings, prosecutors prepared to present a case built on eyewitness accounts, forensic analysis, and expert testimony. The defense, meanwhile, continued to argue that Karmelo Anthony acted in self-defense, challenging the prosecution's interpretation of the evidence. Ultimately, it would be up to a jury to weigh both sides and reach a verdict based solely on the evidence presented in court. If you're following this case and appreciate fact-based true crime coverage without sensationalized rumors, please like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Files, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us continue producing carefully researched investigations. With the investigation complete, the case moved into a courtroom where every witness, every exhibit, and every argument would be tested before a final judgment was reached. As the trial began, the courtroom became the place where months of investigation were examined in meticulous detail. Prosecutors presented witness testimony, forensic evidence, and the timeline they believed proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Karmelo Anthony was criminally responsible for Austin Metcalf's death. The defense maintained that Anthony acted in self-defense, arguing that he believed he was facing an immediate threat during the confrontation. Over the course of the proceedings, jurors heard competing interpretations of the evidence and were instructed to evaluate the facts under Texas law. Every statement, every exhibit, and every witness carried significant weight because the verdict would determine the future of a young defendant and provide an answer, at least in the eyes of the law, for a grieving family. After deliberations, the jury found Karmelo Anthony guilty. During the sentencing phase, additional evidence and arguments were presented before the court determined the appropriate punishment. Anthony was ultimately sentenced to 35 years in prison. Following the sentencing, his legal team filed notice of an appeal, meaning the appellate courts will review legal issues raised by the defense. An appeal, however, is not a new trial and does not overturn a conviction unless the reviewing court finds a legal error that affected the outcome. For Austin Metcalf's loved ones, the verdict brought a measure of legal closure, though it could never undo their loss. For Anthony and his family, the sentence marked the beginning of a lengthy prison term while the appeals process moved forward. Although the courtroom proceedings had concluded, the emotional impact of the case continued to ripple through the community, reminding everyone that behind every headline were families whose lives had been permanently changed by a tragedy that unfolded in only a few moments. When the trial ended and the cameras began to disappear, the pain remained. Courtrooms eventually empty, headlines slowly fade, and public attention shifts to the next story. But for the families at the center of this case, there was no moving on. There was only learning to live with a reality that could never be changed. Austin Metcalf's family continued to mourn the loss of a son whose life ended far too soon. They spoke about the lasting impact his death had on relatives, friends, classmates, and teammates. Milestones that should have been celebrated, graduations, birthdays, and future achievements, would forever serve as reminders of what had been taken away. For Karmelo Anthony's family, the outcome brought a different kind of heartbreak. While the jury had reached its verdict, they now faced the reality of seeing a young family member begin serving a lengthy prison sentence. As the appeals process moved forward, they remained hopeful that the legal system would fully review the issues raised by the defense. The case also left a deep mark on the Frisco community. Students, teachers, coaches, and parents were forced to confront the fact that an event intended to celebrate athletic competition had instead become the scene of a devastating tragedy. Conversations about school safety, conflict resolution, and youth violence grew louder as people searched for ways to prevent another family from experiencing a similar loss. Even now, opinions about the case remain deeply divided. Some believe the verdict delivered justice based on the evidence presented in court. Others continue to support Anthony's claim of self-defense. Regardless of those differing views, one fact remains beyond dispute. One young life was lost, another was forever altered, and two families continue to carry the weight of that day every single day. As the prison gates closed behind Karmelo Anthony, one chapter of this case ended, but another began. The legal proceedings had reached a verdict, yet the consequences of that day continue to unfold. Appeals may continue through the courts, but the conviction and sentence remain in place unless changed through the legal process. The case serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly lives can change. A disagreement that lasted only moments ended with Austin Metcalf losing his life, another young man beginning a lengthy prison sentence, and countless families, friends, classmates, and community members carrying emotional scars that may never fully heal. It is also a reminder to be cautious about what we believe online. Throughout this case, false claims, fabricated images, and misleading stories spread rapidly across social media. The verified facts established through the investigation and the court proceedings remain the most reliable account of what happened, even when rumors continue to circulate. For those closest to the tragedy, justice can never erase grief. A conviction cannot bring back a son, and a prison sentence cannot undo the choices that led to this heartbreaking outcome. What remains is a story that will be remembered not only for its legal significance, but also for the profound human cost behind every headline. If you found this documentary informative and appreciate carefully researched true crime content based on verified facts, please like this video, share it with others, subscribe to Cold Case Files, and turn on notifications so you never miss a future investigation. As this case continues through the appeals process, one haunting question remains. Could this tragedy have been prevented if one decision had been different? Or was it the inevitable result of a single irreversible moment?